Hi, everyone. Dr. Tim here with Hillary for another Dr. Tim's Aquatics podcast. How you doing this morning, Hillary?
I am doing good. Doing good. I think so. We're recording this. We're on Tank Talk with Tyan on Facebook. We got a ton of questions there. So that was a really awesome.
Yeah, that was fun. You tell people how they can access that. You're the social person.
So if you go to Facebook, if you look for the group Tank Talk with Tyan, it should be coming up. And, I'm concerned. I'm not sure if I'm actually saying her name correctly, but if you're interested in watching that, send us a message. I'd be happy to send you an invitation to the group so that you can watch that. And you're going back for round 2, right?
Yes, round 2. Guess her name is Tian. That's how you can find it.
Yes.
And it was so many questions and things that we're going back in November.
Yeah, November 15th, I think.
Tuesday. Yep, Tuesday. November 15th, live, 5 o'clock West Coast time.
Yep.
So it was a lot of fun.
It was.
All right. So today is plant tanks.
Yes.
We get a fair amount of questions. Plants are more and more popular. And by a plant tank, I don't mean an aquarium that has a couple plants in it. I'm talking about where the main focus is plants. So it's a tank where plants are the center of attention and a few fish are put into it. I mean, if you've looked on the internet, magazines, you see these gorgeous planted tanks, landscaped, and there's all sorts of contests. Even at Aquashella, they have a planted tank contest, and they're really beautiful.
Yes, and we should specify this is freshwater because I actually went to a presentation at MACNA about like macroalgae planted, like some saltwater planted tanks. So we're talking about freshwater today.
Yes. So for those who think that maybe we don't pay enough attention to freshwater, we service freshwater aquariums as well as saltwater. We are ambidextrous in this.
And koi ponds too. I talked to somebody that didn't know that we had products for ponds. So we do that as well.
We do. I mentioned my pond because my koi that I've had for seriously, I've had those koi for over 20 years.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
It's a long time to have a fish.
Since I moved in. And they've always had, baby one here, but this year there are 25 baby koi swimming around the pond. It's kind of fun to look at. I'll have to snap a picture or take an image. But
can you give me a short video of them? That would be cool.
Yeah, a short video because they're just hilarious as they swim, and they're scattered about. Then when I go out there, because I'm going to feed them, they've already figured out that big shadow throws food in the pond for them, and they all come together and start schooling in a circle. It's pretty cool to look at. So they're about 2.5, 3 inches long. So I'll get you a video of that.
Sweet.
Okay, so freshwater plant tanks. What we're going to talk about is it's all the questions we get are about cycling the plant tank. So we're going to go through why it's a little bit different to cycle, the sequence of cycling, and maybe the first thing is, do you need to cycle? Which sounds a little bit weird since, our number one product is live nitrifying bacteria. But the fact is, if you are setting up a tank where it's basically going to be plants and a few fish, you don't really need to cycle the tank. So does that mean the podcast is over, Hillary?
I was like, what?
Yeah. You can tell people that I'm not in the sales department. But we speak the truth here. And the truth is, where does ammonia come from? Ammonia comes from fish that are being fed. They're excreting ammonia or corals, but plants they don't excrete ammonia. Now, so this is where you have to make a decision. It's kind of a decision tree. If you're going to set up a tank that's primarily plants, and I'm talking a lot of plants, and later put in a few fish, the truth is you may not need to cycle, or at least no need to do what I would call a fishless cycle, because the nitrifying bacteria will convert any ammonia to nitrate, which is what the plants prefer. But the order of things would be to plant the tank, add some nitrifying bacteria, and then add a couple of fish. And the plants will help filter the nitrogenous waste out of the tank. So that's a question we get, and a lot of people, they aren't told this, but you're setting up this plant tank. You really don't need to be adding ammonia, and surely not at the dosages that we normally recommend, because we're assuming that you're going to put a lot of fish, and fish are going to be the center of attention rather than plants. So with that said, let's say you do want to do a cycle, you do want to put some fish in there. What order should things be? Well, first, most times if you're doing a plant tank, you're using special soils. And these soils are more on the acidic, low pH side. And a lot of them say they don't leach ammonia, but in my experience, almost all of them do. So set up the system, and if you really want to get the tank cycled first using the one and only, I would put in your special substrate and then the nitrifying bacteria and get your filter running. And we've had a rash of this the last couple of days. Your filter has to have media in it, right? Hillary, you've probably seen this. This has to have been 5 emails in the last 2 days. Yeah, I took the filter material out of my filter and I got the filter running. Well, then it's just a water pump. The nitrifying bacteria need a substrate to live on. And what's going to happen is a lot of times people use like RO water or a combination of RO and dechlorinated tap water because they're trying to reduce the alkalinity. Why? Because plants do better in lower pH water because the CO2, the carbonate, is in the form of carbon dioxide, which the plants need. Aquatic plants, just like terrestrial plants, their carbon source is CO2. So I'm going to say breathe in, but that's not really what it is. But they breathe in CO2 and they produce oxygen when the sunlight's on. That's why they're constantly cleaning our air, scrubbing it of CO2 and putting O2 into the atmosphere. That's how Earth became aerobic, is through the action of plants and algae and things like that. And that's what's happening in your water system. And if your pH is super high, like out here in California, it doesn't mean that your plants aren't going to live. It just means that they're really not going to thrive. When you really get into the plant tanks, there's even what are called CO2 bubblers, where you have a tank under the stand or in the stand, and you're slowly bubbling CO2 into the water to increase the amount of CO2 in the water to help the plants grow faster, because that's what they need. And the issue with that, though, is that if your pH is really high, and that CO2 quickly becomes bicarbonate or even carbonate. Those are all forms of the inorganic nitrogen. And it's not the form that you want. You don't want carbonate or bicarbonate. You want it to be CO2, which dominates at the lower pH. And so what a lot of people do is they'll mix their tap water with, RO, reverse osmosis, or reverse osmosis deionized. There's really no reason to do this deionized reverse osmosis or some type of pure water to reduce the alkalinity and make sure the pH is low. So now you've got this soil that's putting out ammonia that's also low pH. You've got water that's low pH, and now you have ammonia in the system. Well, as longtime listeners hopefully have known, well, hold it, low pH. That means that all your ammonia is in the ammonium NH4 plus ion, and the bacteria don't really do well. They live, but they don't convert quickly at low pH. And you're right, they don't, because the total ammonia, the ammonia is in the ammonium form, which the bacteria don't utilize. They use the NH3 ammonia form, which dominates at higher pHs. So that is why when you're setting up a specialized plant tank with these soils and making sure your water's low pH, it is going to take a longer time to cycle. And that's why what I'm saying is set your system up and use regular higher pH, higher alkalinity water, and add the nitrifying bacteria. Get your filter and filter media in there running. Don't add your plants. Again, make the tank bacteria centric for a little bit for the first couple of weeks, and have your pH or your ammonia and your nitrite test kits available so that you can be measuring the progress. And before you even add ammonia drops, they're the ones that we sell, if you're using these soils, measure the ammonia in the water. You may find that you already have a measurable amount of ammonia. That means there's no reason to add, more ammonia, even if it's 0.5 or 1, which is lower than our target of 2. Remember, in the end, this is going to be more plant-centric rather than fish-centric, so you don't need a huge population of the nitrifying bacteria. So let's recap. I said that almost all in one breath. So set up the tank with the special soil. Use regular dechlorinated tap water with a higher pH, higher alkalinity, because that's what the bacteria favor, and get the cycle going. And realize that it may take a little longer because the bacteria they want to be on a surface and they're going to get on that special soil too. But the microenvironment, the environment right where they're colonizing that soil is going to be low pH. So they're just not going to grow as fast. The same thing's going to happen with the nitrite oxidizers. They're not going to grow as fast. Even possibly, it's better than using RO DI water from the beginning. But even with regular dechlorinated tap water with a high pH, a plant tank with special soils just is not going to cycle that as fast. It's not going to be 10 days. It could be, more like 30 days. But keep the ammonia, dose maybe to 1 instead of 4 drops per gallon, 1 drop per gallon, if you even need it. And we've had emails where people are like, my ammonia just won't go down. And it's true. If you put a bunch of ammonia in there from the get-go with that type of soil, and especially if you're using the RODI water, it can be a couple of months before the nitrifying bacteria really work to reduce that ammonia level. And in my experience, plants don't really like high ammonia. So that's why I'm saying don't plant the tank yet. Now, if you want your planted tank right from the start, sure, you can landscape it, the soils, put the plants in there, but realize don't add any ammonia. You can add some nitrifying bacteria, but don't add any fish, right? that you're just going to have plants only, and realize that there's probably going to be some die off of the plants in the very beginning. It takes time for their roots to get established and really start growing, which is okay. You want water movement, and of course, you need really good lights. And nowadays, there are great LEDs. We sell the ASF Pro 10 brand of New Dawn LEDs, and they're really targeted towards plants, because with LEDs, they give off a specific wavelength of light. And with ours, there's a mixture of what the two major spectra are for photosynthesis of plants. So you can really get nice growth going, but it takes time to establish all that. And there's always a little bit of a die off. The tanks don't look great, again, continually look great. And realize that if you're going to be adding any type of liquid fertilizers, which are heavy in iron and potassium and others, that can also grow algae. So you're going to have to be, diligent about that. I think we got one email once where the person said, well, I have my lights on 24 hours because I really want the plants to grow fast. That's not a good idea. The maximum you should have your lights on is 12 hours. With modern LEDs and controllers, you can ramp them up and ramp them down, a sunrise and a sunset, which is always a good idea. And that will help reduce the algae. If you're going to keep your lights on 24 hours, you're just going to have a tank that's going to be dominated by algae.
Hold on. I gotta, did I hear that correctly? The max you should have your lights on is 12 hours.
The very maximum. Yeah.
Very maximum. And you're including like sunrise, sunset in that?
Yeah.
Okay. I always thought that like it should be way less, but
I'm talking about, I mean the maximum. I'm talking about, because we've had people, I got my plants on 24 hours. Why are you doing that? So, 8 hours is good, but not 12 hours at the 100% setting. That's a ramp up and a ramp down. Yep. Thanks for
just
clarifying.
making sure.
No, thanks for clarifying that, because I don't want people to think that I meant 100% for 12 hours, because that's a pretty good way to grow algae too.
Yeah, I could almost like hear people, I'm doing that, and us having a lot more questions.
No. So, no. What was I talking about, Hillary? Oh, additives.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of these additives, algae like them too. Algae are photosynthetic. Algae love iron and micronutrients. So you have to be careful when adding those. And you do need flow, not heavy flow like in a reef tank, but you definitely need some flow into the system and over the plants. And I prefer to have a dedicated media. Even if it's a hang on the tank filter, you can put a bag in there with some of the media for the nitrifying bacteria. And it's okay to add a couple of small fish at the beginning. And I would actually say that it is better, in terms of what I would say easier, to cycle a plant tank with one and only live nitrifying bacteria and a couple of fish, small fish, instead of the ammonia drops in this case. And the fish are going to be fine. People worry, they're going to be harmed, or they're not. You've got a lot of plants in there. You've got the nitrifying bacteria in there. And I'm talking about, some smaller fish, not big cichlids or something like that. You've got zebra danios or all sorts of thread fins and there's just lots of small fish, a couple of, small tetras. You've got lots of choices here with to do this, now So that's setting up the tank, realize the cycling is going to take longer. And especially if you're using, like I've said now for the fifth or sixth time, special soil with low pH water or low alkalinity water, just know that things are going to take longer. There's just nothing really you can do about that. If you do the method I recommended of using dechlorinated tap water, once the system is cycled, now remove as much water as you can. Don't disturb the substrate. Don't siphon clean the substrate, but remove that water. Now put your plants in. And this could be, 2 weeks down the line. Put your plants in, landscape, now refill with the low alkalinity water that'll give you that low pH, and then start your system. The nitrifying bacteria don't grow in the water column, so getting rid of that first set of water, you're not throwing away your nitrifiers. But that's why you don't want a gravel wash, because that's where the nitrifiers are. They're on substrate, or they're also on the media in your filter, so don't clean your filter media, which sounds strange. But, years ago when I first started in this industry with marine land aquarium products, we developed BioWheel. And that was a rotating biological contactor that went in on top of the hang on the tank filter. And over time, it would discolor. And that was the bacteria. That was a good thing. And people would actually throw it away because, well, it was looking dirty. So they were throwing their biological filter away. So don't throw your good bacteria away that are in the filter media. And so now you filled it up with the water, it's planted, running, and you can start to enjoy your tank and realize that nitrite is going to hang around. It, especially in this situation, you will probably have a small, low, but measurable amount of nitrite, 0.1. It just hangs around. That's fine. It's not toxic. It's going to take time for those bacteria, because they just don't like this environment. They do not grow well in the environment of a plant tank such that I've described. So that kind of covers that, I think, Hillary, right? The real hardcore, I want this plant tank and grow plants like crazy.
Yes.
I'm going to talk about a couple of special cases. But also realize that you have to trim the plants. Having a really nice plant tank is much like having a really nice, say, English garden or lawn. It's not maintenance free. You need to trim it. You need to, like I said, fertilize it. Pay attention to the instructions. Don't over fertilize. That can stimulate algae. And it takes a good 6 months or so for the tank to really get established, which during this time, the root systems are being established and the tank is getting balanced. And, there's this concept, it's called the Linden, because it comes from Holland, this town of Linden, University, Linden, where you have these balanced freshwater plant tanks. And what that balance meant was that you're not adding artificial fertilizer, liquid fertilizers. You're basically letting the fish fertilize the plants. And the balance is the right number of fish fed the right amount for the plants in your aquarium. And there's really no hard and fast rule for that. It's better to start out with less fish, and you'll know when you have too many, because you'll start growing algae, and if you don't have enough, your leaves will start to turn brown and yellow. They're having mineral deficiency. So that's one way to go, and it can be achieved. I used to have a nice 30-gallon aquarium that a little bit of quality fish food, don't overfeed, and it fertilizes the plants, and it can look wonderful. But again, the fish are not the main purpose of the aquarium, and that leads to people love cichlids, and so do I. I've had cichlids for a it was my second fish because I put firemouth cichlids into my first aquarium after I had a bunch of swordtails in there. The swordtail population was drastically reduced, but I was a kid. Nobody told me that. Anyways, most cichlids are diggers. They just like to take all the substrate and pile it up in one corner and then move it over to the other. So if you've got your heart set on having cichlids, it doesn't mean you can't have plants, but you have to plan for what's going to happen. And of course, not all cichlids are diggers, but I'm talking about the majority that are. And normally you've got to use a tough plant like an anubias. And what's neat about that is you can actually glue it, or you can use a fishing string, fishing line, which is kind of invisible, and tie the plant to the driftwood or rocks, and eventually it'll become rooted in there. But you've got to use a broadleaf hardy plant like an anubias that's slow grower. The other thing you can do is a lot of times plants will come in this filter floss material in a plastic, little plastic basket. It doesn't look fantastic, but you can put those in little flower pots, like in my koi pond, because koi like to dig in things. I have big flower pots, and the lilies are actually planted in the flower pots because in my koi pond, I have the liner is the bottom. I don't put rocks on the bottom of the koi pond because that just traps organics and makes the whole thing hard to clean. So I've got the plants in, big ceramic flower pots. And then there's rocks, now that the plants are bigger, covering the substrate so that the koi they can't be digging through there. So you can put cichlids with plants. And if you can pick smaller cichlids like the rams are great. Most people don't realize angelfish are cichlid. Angelfish and discus are part of the cichlid family of fish, and they're not diggers, and they make a beautiful display. So you can do fish and plants together. What I would recommend, if that's what you want to do, is establish the plants first, then start adding your fish. And do a little homework. We always stress this. What fish do you want? Do you know what fish you want? I want to keep discus. And discus are a very skittish fish. And they don't move around fast. They kind of, hover in the water. And they're great. But with that, I would recommend plants because it gives them some hiding spots and just provides a level of comfort so that they can go in there and feel more comfortable in the water rather than just a completely, bare tank. And that's maybe versus some African cichlid like the Victorians, where they just live over rock croppings and what they eat is basically what's called Aufwuch, AUFWUH. It's a German word. And it's basically the combination of algae and zooplankton and demersal animals that live on what we might call gunk that grows on the rocks. But that's why they're always with their teeth grinding at that and their lips, grinding off that algae, because it's a mix of algae and plant or animal material. That's where they get most of their nutrition. And in that case, you really don't have plants. So, you have to kind of, if you're going to do plants and fish together, decide what fish, and then there's lots of references of what plants that you're going to want to need.
Okay, I've got questions. I've got animal questions.
Okay.
Well, actually, one's a comment. So, at the last show in Chicago, I went to a local fish store while I was there, and they had in their planted tanks, I think like they didn't have fish in the planted tanks. It was just for the plants. And in every single one of the tanks, they had a single pea puffer in there. And I assume that they were in there to control any pests. I think it's been a long time since I've had a freshwater tank, but it was a freshwater puffer tank and I had loads of plants in there, and my puffer fish took care of all of the snails that were in there. And I always thought that was fantastic.
Oh, no, it is. And that is an issue. You brought up a good point, Hillary, is that generally when you get plants, you're going to get snails. It's kind of a pain, and there's you can try to pre-rinse your plants with the alum and the water, make a solution, and you dip the plants in that, and that helps kill the snail eggs. Because or you can inspect it, but it's very hard to see, that the snail eggs are this gelatinous mass, and a lot of people don't inspect their plants. And snails, once you get them in your tank, they're kind of they are a big pain. So yeah, puffers, clown loaches. I mean, there are different fish there that can help you with pest control on your plants, and I'm sure that's what they were for.
Yep. I always say puffer fish are my favorite, and that's what started me in the hobby, was my little freshwater puffer. So I thought that was cool.
But yes, go ahead.
Shrimp, right? I don't think we've talked about shrimp yet, but I've been to Aquashella back at Aquatic Experience when they still had that. There were loads of planted tanks with these little tiny decorative, I think they were decorative. I heard somebody say that one of the prices on these little tiny shrimp was like $250 or something crazy like that. But people also use them in planted tanks. Are there any sort of different things that people should be doing if they're trying to keep shrimp as opposed to fish?
Well, now you're adding animals, and shrimp definitely, they're not as susceptible, or ammonia levels can be a little higher, but that's why people try or do want to cycle their quote plant tank, because it's really a shrimp tank, again, with the special soils. And so if you want to do shrimp, and there are many varieties that are less than $250. So, and they're gorgeous.
So they're cool.
They're really cool, especially if you're doing a small tank. Sometimes you just don't have the room for a big tank. Consider freshwater shrimp. There's all sorts of colors, greens and purples and yellows and just bright reds. And you need to cycle it with one and only. And usually it's a special soil. So once again, don't just add the ammonia drops. Have your test kit there and see what your system's telling you. And a lot of times people will use spider wood, or some type of what they call driftwood, but it really isn't driftwood. And it can start to get the white fuzzy, kind of fungus on it, which is okay. I mean, it happens in many cases. You can take that piece of wood out and rinse that stuff off and put it back in. But with the shrimp, they don't like high ammonia. They definitely don't like high nitrite. So you're going to have to, maybe add a little bit more bacteria, because, as I've said many times, it's a numbers game. And since at these lower pHs, all the bacteria are working slower, what you need is more bacteria working slower to get the job done. So even though a 2-ounce bottle of one and only is normally for a 30-gallon tank, you can't overdose it. So pour the whole bottle in that 5-gallon shrimp tank, or 2-gallon shrimp tank, because you have a lot of bacteria, it will then help you get through that cycle faster. And don't panic if you've got a little bit of ammonia or a little bit of nitrite. If it's just 0.1, 0.2, you're okay. It'll eventually come down, but with these special soils, it just takes time.
Okay, good to know.
And one thing that can happen though, is at low pHs, all bacterial process is slow. I mean, that's one way of preserving things like your, pellet foods and other types of foods, even human foods. If you get the pH really low, basically bacteria can't grow. So that's a type of preservative. Well, in the aquariums that have low pH, and we're talking, below 6, a lot of these tanks are 5 to 5.5. Uneaten food and organics and things like that are going to hang around a little bit longer. Normally, at a pH of 7, 7, above 7, 8, our waste away bacteria would be constantly degrading these and helping clean up. But that process is going to be slower in a plant tank. And that's why we developed the waste away gel for plants. It's our gel in the little, cartridge that you can put somewhere in the system. It doesn't have to be a real intrusive where that's what you see, but it's constantly releasing a little bit of the waste away bacteria to do two things. It helps degrade the organics on a constant basis, and all that organic material is degraded into CO2, which the plants like, because that's how they get their carbon, and ammonia, low levels of ammonia, that are then nitrified into nitrate, which is the form of nitrogen the plants prefer. So the waste away plant gels can actually help promote plant growth in your tank. And if you aren't having good, you've planted this, you've spent the time and the effort, and you're just not getting the growth and the vibrance that you want, the nice greens, and you're being taken over by algae. Let's go into the troubleshooting. You've set this whole thing up. The number one issue is you get this long, stringy algae growing on the plant leaves. So what's happening is your plants are not growing fast enough, and you probably are doing two other things: adding too much nutrients, and the lights are on too long, too intense. Okay, just like when I talk about that in marine tanks, if you're growing tons of algae and you've got this wonderful, expensive light and you're running that blue channel at 100% on a tank that's only 10, 15 inches of water depth, you're promoting algae growth. And the same thing can happen in plants tanks. You got to realize that the LEDs that are on the market, even the nice T5s that are on the market, they put out an intense light, and you need to regulate that if your tank is smaller. And maybe you don't necessarily have to have a controller, but what you can do is, instead of laying the light strip right across the tank so it's right above the water, is get some legs. Most manufacturers have legs that you can raise the light strip up. And that means the light has to travel further through the water, so it's not as intense. And that's one way to regulate that. And as your tank matures and you're growing more plants, they can be taking out, the nutrients. But usually people are adding too much nutrients in the beginning, and there's so much light and the intensity is too high that you start growing algae on the leaves. So that's what you need to look at is look at the combination of nutrients, your light cycle, and maybe if you don't have a controller where you can control the intensity of the different light channels, because there's a red and a green in there, raise the light up. Now, the other thing is that the plants just don't grow very well at all. Well, the traditional, I'll say old school, if you just go get some gravel and throw some gravel in the tank and throw the plants in there, that's pretty much set up for disaster. I mean, plants do need nutrition. They get nutrition from their roots. along with the leaves that are the power cells that are doing the photosynthesis. So you do need to amend the soil. I prefer a combination of sand to plant the plant in, with which you've added the red soil, the powder that, and I'm sorry, I've blanked on this. I'll remember, and Hillary can put it in the notes. Sorry, Hillary. But I like to mix that up with sand and then put the sand in, plant that, and then cover that with some gravel. Or I've had sand tanks, or like I say, there are special soil amendments. But just going out and using, the regular enamel covered gravel that you buy at a pet store or a big box store is not going to do your plants any good. And so if you've done that, that's probably why your plants aren't very good, growing very well, is their foundation is poor. So you're going to have to change that. And then, it's kind of matching your plant of what you're trying to do with the light and the tank system. Some of the plants that are inexpensive, multi-leaf, fine leaves, they don't really do good all. They're cheap, but they don't do great in a lot of situations. Stick with the tried and true. The sort, mostly swords do well. The Val. There's not a nice plants that you can get in there, but they have to have a good foundation, a good lighting system, and then they have to be fertilized, which can be from the fish, or you can add artificial fertilizers, but don't overdose. Overdosing any of that is just going to cause algae problems.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like we've talked about overdosing products, fertilizers, food, whatever, numerous times.
Yes. Numerous times. We have a person right now, and they're like frustrated because they can't get their phosphate below 0.1. And then finally, I don't know why I didn't ask this sooner. We're like 5 emails into this. How many fish you got in this tank? Oh yeah, the tank's super overcrowded and I feed a ton. Well, what do you expect? It's just pretty common sense there that if you're going to have a ton of fish in there and a ton of food, you're going to have some phosphate. So we get back to that balance. But to end here, a freshwater plant tank can be so relaxing. It can be as wonderful as any reef tank, in my opinion. It'd be calming, relaxing, just almost like a Zen environment. So if you have always been interested in that, give it a shot. Try something new. Maybe you're that saltwater person and you need a little challenge. Go for the freshwater tank. It doesn't have to be big. Just know the limitations of smaller tanks versus big tanks, and you can really have a nice tank, and then throw some, put some shrimp in, maybe a couple of fish up at the top, and you've got a nice biosystem there.
Yep, absolutely. And if you need inspiration, send me a message. Let me know. I will share some of my favorite pages on Instagram to follow. I could watch these Planet Tank videos and like aquascaping tank videos all day long. They're so relaxing.
Right. And it used to be plants, were in the bottom corner dark of the pet store. And times have changed. There are companies that just make plant systems and sell just plants and all the things that you need. And it doesn't have to be expensive, but realize that if plants is what you want, you need to search out and use products that are for plants. Then you're going to have success.
Yep. I feel like saying you get what you pay for. Like, look for quality things that are for what you need and go with that. Don't try and find the easy way out. Yeah.
Well, when you go from a saltwater fish only tank to a reef tank, it's a different set of equipment. You need a calcium reactor. You need the blue light. You don't need those in fish only tanks. And the same thing with plant tank. You've had fresh water. Now you're going to do plants. Plants have different requirements. So you're going to have to tweak how you set up and maintain that aquarium versus your normal freshwater aquarium. And there are definitely good products and lots of knowledge and companies that have that knowledge out there to help you have success.
Exactly. Well said.
All right. Okay, Hillary, I think that's going to do it for this session of Dr. Tim's Aquatics podcast. And as always, we love your questions. You can hit up Hillary numerous ways on social media, Facebook and Instagram. And we don't do TikTok, do we?
No, we don't do TikTok.
Okay.
No, we're not on TikTok.
We got enough. Enough said. Or email us info@drtimsaquatics.com. We always like hearing about people. And
YouTube is the other one.
YouTube. I knew there was something.
And we're on Twitter too, but Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube are our big ones.
Okay. All right, everyone. Thanks again for listening, and good fish keeping.